Looking out over the peaceful harbours today, it's almost impossible to imagine that during the war, this was hell on earth. For 2 years during the Second World War, the people of the island were forced underground in terror, as the Axis powers unleashed on them one of the greatest aerial bombardments in history. When Italian dictator Benito Mussolini declared war on Britain, it meant war for Malta too. Mussolini had dreamed of creating a new Rome. Malta would cement the link between Italy and his empire in Africa.
When the bombs started coming down, the first reaction was terror.
Agius Ferrante was 16 in 1940 and remembers those early attacks well.
At first we were frightened. We got very used to the bombing, because for the first few months of the war, when the Italians were bombing us, they had absolutely no idea what to bomb. They were much happier to put the bombs in the sea and go on. As a matter of fact, there was a caricature in the paper saying "Coraggio fuggiamo," courage, let's run away.
By the autumn, the island was still in British hands. Il Duce's gamble had failed. One man's blunder had brought a new player to the Mediterranean: Germany. In December 1940, Hitler sent Fliegerkorps 10 to Sicily. The impact was immediate. The infrastructure of the island was being reduced to rubble. Thousands lost their homes. Electricity and water mains were damaged, and distribution of goods became harder. Although the suffering was shared, for Agius Ferrante there was a marked divide between British and Maltese.
My father was very, very fond of the British, but disapproved certain things, like us girls during the war going a bit wild with the RAF and others. But there was this colonialism, and we were treated as colonials. But there was no ill feeling as such. It was just that they felt we were inferior, rather than that we were no good.
We knew we were going to be beaten to pieces, because they now have 109Fs. We used to complain every day, all day. The people who were leading us didn't really know what was happening. We were flying stuff we should never have flown. We weren't reinforced in the manner that we should have been.
Complacency was to blame for the continued use of obsolete aircraft. This was a result of indifferent leadership. There'd been the chance to build up a new fighter force that hadn't been taken. And it was the Maltese people that were going to pay dearly. Field Marshal Kesselring was convinced this meant invasion.
In order to produce a safe connection route from Italy to North Africa, the capture of Malta is an absolute requirement.
On Sicily, Kesselring had more than 800 German and Italian aircraft at his disposal. Malta had 80 fighters.
When the Germans started coming, then they meant business. And there were bombs, bombs and bombs.
With the hospital to carry on their work.
During the heavy bombing, we had nothing. We didn't dare go out during the heavy bombing when there was nothing to eat. In Malta, the farmers were frightened to go to work. The fishermen were frightened to go out to sea because they used to machine gun them. So when the convoy didn't come in, there was no food on the island. If you had the money, there was nothing to buy.
We carried on above ground between the raids. And we ran like rabbits down into the shelters if the bombers were too near. Then the dockyard grimly moved underground into the living rock. Soft yellow limestone rock that trembles and vibrates under direct hits but doesn't yield.
Malta had been neutralized. The island was on its knees, gasping for life.
The only time I'd been to public shelter was a terrible experience, really, because it was the big shelter under Valletta, and the people had bunks, and it was sort of dirty, and it was like a sort of ghetto. And the noise of the bombs, the vibrations, was something terrible. The poor people, most of them didn't have a home. They lived down there, so they cooked down there, they slept down there, they made love down there, they did everything down there.
This was the Malta Blitz. Axis forces mounted round-the-clock air attacks. In 8 weeks, nearly 7,000 tons of explosives fell on the island. Malta had become the most bombed place on Earth.
It was hard going. It was hard going because on top of it all you were hungry. You had nowhere to live when your house was bombed. But we had no alternative. And when your back is to the wall, you seem to have a lot more courage.
There were few Spitfires left either. Within 48 hours, just 7 remained. Exposed and unprotected, they were shot up on the ground. On the ground, Spitfires were easy pickings for Axis aircraft. At Berchtesgaden, Hitler met with Mussolini to discuss plans to invade Malta, codenamed Operation Hercules. Weakened and vulnerable, the island was braced for invasion. The suffering of the people was still to increase. The island was starving.
It was in June when the siege settled down on Malta, good and proper, grim and cruel. The phrase target date was introduced too. It's when the bread runs out, along with the ammunition and the fuel. And the realization that this was actually the test of how long we could make everything last.
The staple food of the Maltese workmen is bread. You were given a slice or so per head a day. The bread became black.
The government set up a feeding scheme called the Victory Kitchens. With few supplies, the island had to feed over 250,000 mouths every day.
You had to go with a bit of paper worth 3 pence, and you used to get a bowl of disgusting soup, or a tin of between 4 of McConaughey's herrings in tomato sauce, or something like that.
The island had survived its blitz, but beating starvation would be a greater test.
Well, I wondered sometimes whether we would ever leave the island. And the Maltese people, you know, the more bombs that were dropped, the louder their prayers. It was quite amazing, really. They were really stoic. They always believed that it would be all right. I think they were rather marvelous.
The Ohio, I remember. A ship, a big ship, with its decks completely awash, no one on board, like a ghost, being brought in by a destroyer and 2 tugs, going very, very slowly.
All along the bastions, crowds watched Ohio's agonizingly slow progress. But at 8 a.m, she finally passed through the breakwater and into Grand Harbour. It was the 15th of August 1942, the most important date in Malta's calendar, the feast day of Santa Maria.
I don't think I've ever cried with so much emotion. And the army were there, and they were throwing their hats up in the air on the quay there. And the people were crying and singing and clapping.
The convoy of Santa Maria was so welcome because that really brought everything. I think at the end, if it wasn't for that convoy, we would have been down then. Even children took place to see that they were all emptied, to take them away and put them in storage somewhere, the rations. because otherwise we would have been really starved, or no ammunitions, no medicines, no nothing.